musicians think they don't need good grades in school, that the grades are just not important. And that's not true. We had something called the X Factor. I know it when I see it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting episode. Today, we're diving into a side of college admissions that's truly in its own world, getting into music schools. Applying to conservatories or even music programs is a whole different experience. So, to help us unpack it all, I'm joined by two incredible experts from inside music schools who've helped tons of students get into the country's top programs. So, Steve and Karen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thanks for inviting us.
I'm so excited to learn from you today. Before we jump in, can I have the both of you introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about your background, your role at Inside Music Schools, and what brought you into this really unique world of music education and admissions.
I'll break the rule of ladies go first.
Okay.
I'm Stephen Lipman, and I am the founder and the president of Inside Music Schools. However, before that, my prior life in music, I started as a classical clarinetist growing up in Brooklyn, New York, and went to a conservatory after high school to study classical clarinet and did that for a few years until I discovered that wasn't the world for me. So I dropped out of the conservatory for a semester or so to think about things and what I wanted to do. And it led me to realizing there was much more opportunity if you played multiple woodwinds in a contemporary popular jazz vein, which means saxophone, flute, and things of that nature, and discovered that there was a school that really specialized in those fields. It was called, at the time, Berklee School of Music. I researched it and found it looked like it was perfect for me. When I left Berklee, I taught public school music, that is, in the Boston area for a few years. I think maybe 2 years or thereabouts, when Berklee called me and said, would you consider coming back to Berklee? I went back to Berklee as a faculty member for about 7 or 8 years, where I taught harmony and ear training and ensembles. A few years into that, they tapped me to become the director of admissions. So I was actually Berklee's first director of admissions and learned the job over about a 26-year period. My last 15 years were spent being the vice president for student affairs, which meant I oversaw the admissions office, the financial aid office, scholarships, and student employment, and thought I would retire after 40 years in the year 2010, only to find myself being chased, if you will, by families that had students that wanted to go to music college and had a lot of questions and a lot of doubts, and connected with me and said, would you just help us out a little bit here? We know you know a lot about music schools. I really didn't intend to start a career or a second career, but I guess I backed into it. And one day I looked up around me and I had 6 or 8 families that I was working with and realized I had a business here. I had a niche that was very helpful. In 2010, I started Inside Music Schools. So then we're going into our 15th year now. We've probably connected with and worked with over 300 students, maybe closer to 400. And it's a very rewarding, very satisfying undertaking. That's where we are today.
Like Steve, I have a musical background. I started playing classical piano when I was 8, and I continued throughout college where I earned a Bachelor of Arts degree with a music major. I've since also earned a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies, and I have a college counseling certificate from University of California, San Diego. But I knew I wasn't a performer. So I went into higher education, focusing on music schools. Most recently, I was director of admissions and recruitment at the University of Miami Frost School of Music for 17 years. Prior to that, I worked in admissions at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater and Dance, and Indiana University on the Southeast campus. And I had around a 30-year career. But after working in the school environment for so long, I decided I wanted to focus on helping students. And so I knew that Inside Music Schools was the top music consultancy, and I knew Steve and that I wanted to work with him. And luckily for me, it all worked out.
Karen has been a tremendous asset to the students and their families. She comes with an incredible background in history that balances mine. As you realize now, I come from a conservatory background predominantly. I attended two conservatories. Karen attended a large university and then worked at three large universities. So we really have a great relationship and partnering and balancing each other's experiences.
Let's start with the big picture now. Steve and Karen, a lot of families are familiar with how to navigate essays, APs, maybe a few recommendation letters. But when it comes to music school admissions, what makes applying into a music conservatory or a music program fundamentally different? Where do students and families often get caught off guard?
Great question, Jillian. Let me start by saying that music students, as a rule, have to do pretty much everything that an English major has to do in applying for college, or a biology major for the most part. Although I would like to say that conservatory expectations or requirements are different than university or liberal arts colleges. So there is a difference, but in general, those students still have to perform academically, have to submit transcripts, possibly standardized testing, and all of the usual things you would expect. However, yes, they're very different in their approach. Some of the things that a music major has to submit, we'll start with an artistic resume. Colleges want to see a resume that's designed for a musician, a composer, a performer. So we want a 1 to 2 page resume that highlights those skills and those achievements. Usually, a personal statement is desired where they paint themselves as a committed, motivated musician and give a good picture of who they are, who they want to be. Something very uniquely different that a university student doesn't have to do is something called a pre-screening video. These colleges get many more applications than they have the ability to listen to live auditions. So they do a pre-screening step first, which means they ask the student to do a pre-screening video of up to about 10 minutes to give an indication to the school whether they're at the appropriate level for them to invite for a live audition. So that pre-screening is the first hurdle that music majors have to jump through in order to continue on. There's also something known as a portfolio. Students that are either composers or producers, technology majors, usually have a portfolio, not unlike an art portfolio, where the college is asking them to submit probably 2 to 3 works, original works, in a portfolio format, once again, to determine whether they wish to pursue that applicant or not. If you don't pass pre-screening, you're done with that applicant. If you don't get accepted as a portfolio, same thing. And it all ends with a live audition, almost always at the school itself, where you are given a specific set of repertoire and requirements that they want you to perform live. You can't just usually pick anything you want to play live at the audition. They tell you, choose from this repertoire. In most cases, they expect you to be there live. However, they will, on occasion, accept a recording or a video, especially from international students. Artistic resume, personal statement, pre-screening video, portfolio, live audition. That's 5 or 6 things a music major has to do. The English major doesn't. Where do they get caught up? They get caught up by not realizing those 6 or 7 things in advance and starting early enough to prepare them. Early enough means as the minute you hit high school practically, but certainly starting these things in the junior or senior year is probably a little bit late.
That's very interesting. I think I want to know more about conservatories versus university programs because I think a lot of people get very confused about those two. What are like the key differences between applying between a conservatory versus a music program within a larger university? How should students kind of start thinking about which path fits them the best?
One of the most significant differences between the application process at a conservatory and a music school within a university is the academic component. At a conservatory, they will ask for your high school records, your high school transcript, and they want to see those just to see if you can succeed, if you have a good work ethic, if you can apply yourself. However, the academic performance will not weigh heavily in the final decision. And it's unlikely that conservatories will require standardized test scores like SAT or ACTs. However, at a music school within a university, The applicant will undergo an academic review, just like the rest of the university applicants. They'll look at, as you heard Steve mention, you're going to do all the same things. So they'll look at your high school GPA, the competitiveness of the curriculum that you've taken. And by that, I mean, did you take advantage of APs and honors classes, those types of things? They're going to read letters of recommendation and essays. And in some cases, they will require standardized test scores. Now, most universities say they do a holistic review of all the pieces in an applicant's file, but it's a little different for music applicants because the music department will weigh in on that final decision. And so the music department will use feedback from the faculty about the things you heard Steve mention, the auditions, the portfolios, and in some cases, interviews. And then they'll make a recommendation to the university about who should be admitted. But in most cases, it's the university that makes the final decision after it gets input from the music department. To your question, how should students decide one way or the other? If they're working with inside music schools, it's likely that Steve and I will provide a school list that has both conservatories and some music schools at universities included on it. And that depends somewhat on what major they're pursuing and other factors that we've learned about the student. But in general, we want our students to have a really broad understanding of which programs might meet their needs. And we're going to encourage them then to do the research about these schools so that they have a wide range of options. Ultimately, students may end up applying to both a conservatory and a music school within a university because in the end, either one could be a good fit.
I guess it seems like you have to build like a really well-rounded student. You have to be good in your studies and also good in the performance side of things. So at Insight Music School, do you actually help build that specific profile or academic persona for each student?
We work with them on making sure they're selecting the right classes, making sure they're taking advantage of those competitive course options when they're available to them and when it's appropriate. We're also going to make sure that they understand the differences between what might be required of them versus other students or at a conservatory. So we'll cover the whole scenario, regardless of if they end up applying to conservatories or universities.
Karen was very thorough with that response, but there's something that we left out, I think, that is worth inserting here, and that is all of these schools that we work with get a considerable attention from international students. I know at Berklee, we had a huge international population. I'm sure at Karen's schools, there were quite a number of international students applying. The TOEFL examination is yet another criteria that international students have to maneuver around to make sure that the student from Europe, Asia, from wherever can read, write, and comprehend the language.
Yeah, I remember I had to take that as a student as well when I came here, which is not too bad. That's like another extra step to get through the process. Now, I want to get into the mindset of an admissions officer at one of these schools. What are they actually looking for in a strong music applicant? How do those criteria differ from academic admissions?
Keep in mind, if we were only talking about admission to a university, it would be an easier question to answer. But people listening to this have to realize there are differences with conservatory expectations and reviews and universities, as Karen described. So some of the things I'm describing may be hopefully universal, but they may apply in one case more than another. I think in no particular order of priority, the academic achievement is expected that the student be a good student because music students still have to take academic subjects, whether they go to a conservatory or a university. The state that they're studying in requires a minimum number of academic credits. So even if you're at a conservatory, you're going to take anywhere from 24 to 40 academic subjects. So the conservatories still need to make sure we have a student who's capable of covering these classes. In addition to that, what I think both universities and conservatories are looking for, once again, in no particular order, I think certainly they want to get a feeling that this student has good feeling for music and has potential. Also, very important, and some of these first criteria may surprise people, teachability. They've got to get the feeling that this student is very teachable, not closed minded, not narrowly focused, but a very open minded, teachable kind of a student, meaning that a student doesn't come in just wedded to one style of music or one style of composer or in terms of composing or performing. They want open mindedness where they can expand the students' expectations. Following that, I think the other requirements are technical skill and accomplishment. Whether you play a saxophone or a trumpet or the piano or you're a vocalist, do you have technical skills on that instrument or vocally? I think a fourth objective there is appropriate repertoire. Has this student, once again, whether they're a performer or a composer or a singer, have they been exposed to the repertoire of their instrument or their voice? Do they know what's expected in terms of their area? And lastly, I think they're looking for a student who's taken advantage of the opportunities they had. Did they take private lessons if they were in a location where private lessons were available? Did they perform in their school ensembles? Did they take full advantage of anything outside of school, such as community orchestras, community bands? And lastly, at least in my job, we had something called the X Factor.
Mm.
Till this day, I can't really tell you what the X factor is, but I know it when I see it.
Hmm. Is that a feeling, like a spark that you feel like, oh, that's it, that's the X factor?
It really is. And there's not just one thing that contributes to the X factor. It might be the personality of the student in an interview. It might be their presentation in a pre-screening video. It might be any number of things that just tells you this kid has got it. Sometimes the X factor fools you and you're wrong, but you do have to go with your gut sometimes.
Have you had that experience where you liked a student and then you think they have the X factor, and then when you meet them, it's, oh, actually, that was a mistake? Do you had any experience with that?
Jillian, that's really interesting. The answer to that is yes, but it's usually the opposite. And Karen's heard me speak of this. There's been many times where I've said in admissions review, this kid just doesn't have it. I just don't feel it. And when we vote, I vote no. The committee votes yes. The student comes and does marvelously. There's been more occasions where I didn't get that X factor, but the student wound up doing through motivation, through commitment, through being in an environment that really turns them on. They do wonderful. So I was wrong more cases in not guessing in that regard.
I actually like that you mentioned about the X Factor, because I want to talk about pre-screens now. I think this is the part where I picture it as a movie audition, like the bright lights, the camera, and the nerves kicking in. It's like a totally make or break moment for a lot of students. But for anyone who's new to this, what actually happens at this stage? What are students typically required to do at this point?
Pre-screening videos feature the student performing, right, on their primary instrument or voice, and they typically do at the time of application. Now, it's really interesting what you just said about what are they for? Why are students asked to do this? And it's interesting because schools pre-screen because, to be really honest, they want to weed out students who they feel aren't competitive enough to move to that next stage, which is the live audition. And so you have to pass the pre-screening videos to move on to the live audition step. And so they're really important. The studio or instrument faculty will use the videos to assess a student's musicianship skills. And typically they'll ask for maybe 3 to 5 videos of the student playing or singing repertoire that meets the requirements that the school has posted on their website. Again, this is like the first hurdle, right? You submit them with your application. There's an initial review. And as Steve mentioned, you don't move on in the process unless you pass that pre-screening. So they can be very important.
Would you be able to, I think like Steve mentioned, would you be able to identify if the student has the X factor just from the pre-screen?
You might feel a lot of it has to do with how they present themselves on the videos. And so you might see something or hear something or feel something just from the video experience. And that could be the difference between moving you on to the next step of an audition or maybe not being considered any further.
Since you mentioned it's such a crucial step, what are some of the most common mistakes students make in these pre-screen videos? Are there any wow factor that make the admissions team take notice?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues students face in selecting or in creating their pre-screening videos is selecting the right repertoire. And so they need to make sure that it not only meets the school's requirements that they've posted, but that it also highlights their individual style and skills. Of course, the technical aspects of filming pre-screens are important too. Look, schools don't expect families to spend a ton of money to go to a studio or have a professional film their videos. But the quality, especially the sound, I would say is important. So the video should be clear so the faculty can see your technique, your hand position, or your embouchure, for example. But the main thing is that they can clearly hear and see you perform so they can assess your skills. But about that, what can they do? Like, what's the wow factor? And so, some of the best advice I've gotten from faculty about creating pre screening videos is that the students should act like they're performing live, right? You should envision like your audience or the faculty committee is in the room there with you while you're filming. And so you perform for them. You should really try and showcase your musicality and your stage presence as if you were live.
That's very fascinating. I think I have so much respect for students who put themselves out there and perform. I think huge props to them, honestly.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's say a student makes past the pre-screen, or maybe if their program doesn't require it altogether, but they still need to submit an audition tape. What are some of the common audition tape mistakes?
Jillian, the mistakes that they might make in submitting a recording, a video audition, are similar to some of the mistakes that students make when they do their pre-screening. These are some of the things that I've seen that are no-nos. You must perform the expected repertoire. Okay, in most cases, there's a couple of exceptions, but in most cases, schools designate we want 2 pieces from the classical repertoire. We want 3 pieces from arias or Italian operas. We want 3 jazz tunes from this list of 10. They mean it. They don't want students not following their directions. That alone tells them something if the student doesn't follow directions. So choosing the repertoire that's designated is mistake number one, or rather not choosing it. Not experimenting beforehand with the sound quality. If you haven't tried it out and listened back to it and you just record yourself and it's a poor recording and you send that off unknowingly, they're probably not going to be able to make a determination upon listening to it. A second criteria I would say is making sure you check your sound, listen back to it a couple of times, and make sure all the settings are appropriate. Not adhering to the time limits. If the schools usually impose a time limit, which they do, of about 10 minutes, don't play 15 minutes. They will stop listening after the required time. So you can't think, oh, I'm really superb. I'm going to play the entire Beethoven fifth for them and on piano, and they're going to listen. They won't listen to the whole thing. Dressing inappropriately, I think, is a mistake that students don't necessarily think about. Karen and I have had pre-screening videos where a student shows up in Bermuda shorts, no shoes, a Def Leppard t-shirt, okay? And maybe they're a violinist. No, that doesn't send the right message. So dressing appropriately on screen, whether it's a pre-screening or whether it's a video audition, is important. And the last thing about mistakes is often students stand in front of very distracting backgrounds. There might be all kinds of Jackson Pollock prints behind them, or there may be different kinds of living room furniture that's distracting, lamps and things like that. Try to record in a very neutral place where the eye of the watcher is not visually taken away from the performance. Those are 6 or 7 mistakes that are sometimes we have to make sure that students, before they do a pre-screening, we go through all these steps with them and hopefully save them a lot of time.
I've had a podcast previously with another former admissions officer, and they did an interview with a student and they came in with their gym attire. And it was not a good first impression. So I think, what is dressing appropriately like for, especially for students doing an audition tape or attending a pre-screen or an audition?
I'm going to let Karen handle that because she alluded to it a little while ago about doing a pre-screening and thinking you're in front of an audience.
Yeah, that's a great point. They shouldn't think as if they're going to a performance. If you're a classical singer or instrumentalist, you might think about what would you wear to a concert at school or to an all-state audition or your community orchestra recital, those types of things. If you're a jazz student, it's a little bit more flexible, but you still want to look nice. You don't want to wear jeans with holes and that type of thing. A nice pair of jeans is okay with maybe a polo or a button-up shirt. Sure, that's fine. You don't have to wear a jacket and tie, in my opinion. And then we have a lot of contemporary or modern music students. They focus on more modern genres like rock and pop and country. And so in their case, I think it's really important that they still be able to express their individual style, but there's a fine line maybe between appropriate and inappropriate. Sure, you can dress the part, but you don't want to go over that line of being inappropriate. So maybe if you were going to play at a local coffee house, maybe something along those lines, as long as it's not revealing or just doesn't send the right message with any kind of graphic or anything like that.
In this case, Karen's absolutely right. And especially with the pop rock contemporary crowd. Let's face it, we know how performers dress or don't dress when they're performing. However, in the instance that you're asking about, I think it's better safe than sorry, meaning conservative is better at that stage. When you get on stage and it's your gig, you can dress whatever way you choose to promote yourself. However, I think that the way you appear before an audition committee, it sends a message. Do you respect these people? And I think that going too far in a non-conservative way maybe sends the wrong message to the panel that's auditioning you. It's a little bit safer to be conservative at that point and express yourself later on when you're in school or when you're on stage.
That makes total sense. You don't really want to make people feel uncomfortable if you're like underdressed.
Or take away from your performance because they're so focused on what you're wearing. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so now we've talked about the performance side of things. Let's dive into another critical part of the application. I think, Steve, you talked about this a little bit before, resumes and portfolios. What are some of the standout experiences or achievements that can really set a student apart in the eyes of selective programs?
Participation in all kinds of school musical activities, as well as outside. So if there's a school musical each year, they would expect the performer maybe to either be on stage singing or in the pit orchestra performing. School jazz ensemble, school orchestra, school marching band, even sometimes. If it exists at that school, I think they would expect a student to participate, as well as outside of school, community orchestras. Karen made mention of all state, all city. In every single city, major city, there are these outside community orchestras, which you have to audition for and be accepted to, but you're working under wonderful instructors. I think something else they're looking for that you've mentioned in the past are summer programs. There are opportunities for you to attend a summer program after your ninth grade, 10th grade, certainly by your 11th grade. They offer tremendous opportunity to bridge the gap between what high school is and what college is going to be like. You will learn an awful lot. You'll network with some wonderful faculty. You'll gain relationships that you might have for years to come. So summer programs are absolutely, I would almost say, a necessity and expected. And lastly, I think leadership skills, entrepreneurial skills. I think they'd like to see students that have taken initiative, have started a club, have started an ensemble on their own, and shown that they can think outside the box.
I was just going to add that I think, especially for the summer programs, there are so many opportunities that for me, it's a good idea to take advantage of different programs. Don't go to the same summer program 4 years in a row, for example. I think it makes sense to kind of branch out and go to different ones and have different experiences, and also activities that show growth and progression. And so that can lead to, if you start out in one ensemble, maybe the lower level jazz band, and then you move up, that type of thing is also important, is showing that you're growing as an individual and a player.
I overlooked a very important aspect of what moves the needle in selective programs. And of course, this depends on what your principal objective is. but creativity. They're looking for creativity. Now, in some cases, it's harder to express than in other. If you're a classical pianist, you got to play the music the way it was intended to be played. However, if you're a jazz musician, they don't want to hear you copy a jazz player that you admire. They want to hear something original. If you're a composer, they probably don't want to hear an exact example. Mozart's already written it. You don't have to write it. Okay. They want to hear some and look at some originality. If you're a songwriter, it's very hard to be, with the amount of stuff that's out there today, it's hard to be original. But if you can show originality, that's very impressive in moving the needle.
Do you have any specific summer programs or competitions that you'd recommend for students to look into to beef up their portfolios? Like maybe a specific school that has a summer program or competition?
Almost all schools, whether they're conservatories or universities that have significant music major programs, have summer programs. The reason is manyfold, but one of the more important ones, to be frank about it, is it's a recruiting vehicle. If they can get you on campus in July and August and impress you with what they do, impress you with their faculty, and teach you to improve and grow, you're probably going to look at that school more seriously. So it is a recruitment in a way, but they prove to be very helpful. Like I said a little while ago, you're studying with wonderful faculty from that community or outside. You're making a lot of friends that you'll carry on with, and you probably will find out whether that school has the right vibe for you by attending a summer program. So if you're thinking you want to go to Indiana University, they have a summer program. If you're thinking you want to go to New England Conservatory, they have a summer program. Some of the really established ones, probably the oldest one in the country, is Interlochen. Interlochen, Michigan, probably is the oldest music boarding school where students go for high school to specialize in music preparation. That's certainly a major one. Berklee has a good number of summer programs. As I said, Stanford has a number of them. Miami has summer programs as well. Karen, am I missing a standout leader in the field?
There are so many, literally, like Steve said, almost every school will offer something, and it can require a lot of research because they can focus on different things, or let's face it, be better at certain things. If you're a jazz player, you want to look at specific programs that have more to offer in the area of jazz.
I hope our listeners are taking notes because I'm learning a ton. So we've covered so much about making an impressive application, but let's take a step back for a moment about finding the right fit in a music school. Is it more than just prestige or rankings? How do you help a student approach this and really hone in on like the right school for them? Any other factors that they should consider when, they're choosing a place to go to?
This is really important, right? Because where they end up is going to be the ultimate decision, usually a really first big decision in their young lives, right? So first of all, at IMS, we're going to try to learn as much as we can about them, about their musical and academic background, their training, their goals and aspirations. And we're going to go way deeper than just what major are they interested in or what instrument do they want to study. We're going to get into details like, does the size of the school matter to them? What about the geographic location or the type of curriculum offered and more? And we do that because we want to understand not only how they've gotten to where they are, but where they want to end up. So that goals and aspirations plays a big part of it. And then trying to get to that right fit of schools is often informed by some of the assessments that we do. For example, we conduct mock auditions to assess their playing or singing. We do portfolio reviews for songwriters and composers and producers and technology students. And during those assessments, we're going to have faculty from top music programs work with them and provide feedback. Then we're going to take everything we've learned, all the feedback we've gotten, and we're going to create a well-balanced school list for them that has targets, safety, and reach schools. And regarding your question about prestige and rankings, School X, for example, may have a well-known name, but the environment may not be what a particular student is comfortable with. And so that's not a good fit for them just because of the name. Another example is school X might be a good fit for one student and not for another. So again, we're going to take all that information, those assessments, their skill level, and we're going to create a personalized list for each student.
The case of that you asked, right fit, this is an instance where US News and World Report is not going to help you. What do I mean by that? In the academic world, let's face it, if a student's family and the student desires a prestige school, an Ivy League school, US News and World Report's going to let you know who's number one this year and who's dropped down to number six, et cetera, et cetera. That's not going to be the case with music programs as a rule. The curriculum is extremely important, meaning this. Everybody's heard of Juilliard, and students and families that are not in the know, everybody wants to go to Juilliard. But Juilliard is not the right place for everybody. If you want to be a pop songwriter or pop contemporary singer, Juilliard is not going to serve you well. So the name and the prestige and the reputation doesn't always match with every student. If you want to be a jazz performer, a school that is exclusively classical, Colburn Conservatory on the West Coast is a marvelous classical school, but they don't have a jazz department. So even though they come up number one on a lot of college lists as a music school, for the jazz performer, it's not really the right place. So the curriculum is extremely important for the right fit. And then after that, the other criteria that Karen mentioned, geographic, size of school, faculty, et cetera, come into play.
So, something we hear a lot about in both the academic and music admissions world is how important connections can be. Something like similar to what Steve mentioned about networking in general and actual relationship with professors. So, I'm curious, how important is it for students to start building those relationships with faculty at schools they're interested in? And how early should they start doing this?
I don't personally feel that those kinds of trial lessons and contacts are essential. I know that more and more families these days want a trial lesson for their student at almost every school they're applying to. I don't think it's essential. I think it's helpful, but I don't think it's required. But here's why I don't think they're essential. These top-notch teachers, they might do 100 trial lessons over the course of a given year of high school students that want some feedback. The likelihood of that teacher remembering a 45-minute lesson when you were a sophomore, when you go to apply for college, I'm not so sure how important it is. Can it help? I guess so, if you are extremely impactful during that meeting. But I don't think that they necessarily remember, oh, I saw that kid when he was a sophomore and he played beautifully and we won him. I don't think has all that much impact. The live audition as a senior has much more impact. If you don't have the goods when it comes to the audition or the assessment or the academic standards, that meeting is not going to amount to a lot.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about support now, because I think navigating music admissions is no small task. And I know Insight Music Schools offers different levels of guidance for students and families. Can you walk us through how those tiered services work and how should a family figure out which level of support makes the most sense in the process?
You're absolutely right. We offer 4 tiers of service: silver, gold, platinum, and platinum plus. And they start small. For example, silver only has, I think, 4 different activities included in it. Gold has a few more, I think 10 or so. Platinum and platinum plus, much more extensive. And they have many more activities and activities that are meant to be repeated over the course of several years to assess progress, for example. The silver and gold tiers are the smaller. They have a set number of activities, and it takes a certain amount of time to complete those. It could be 4 months, it could be 6 months. But the thing is, once we're done with those activities, then our work together with the student is done. So we'll do those 4, 5, 6, 7 activities. And then, like I said, it could have been 4 months, or we may have been working together for 6 months, but then we're done. The platinum and platinum plus Again, much more extensive. And we work with the families all the way through May 1st when the student decides what school they're going to go to. And so we'll be with them throughout the whole process, preparation, research, assessments, applying, all the way through. They've got all their offers in front of them, and we can sit down and talk about which school is right. And so during our introductory consultation, we'll talk about the student's background and what they want, and we'll outline each tier and what it includes and help the family understand which one might be a best fit for them. For example, if a student comes to us in their sophomore year, it makes sense that the Platinum or Platinum Plus program may be a good fit because then we have enough time to work with them over 2 years to get them ready, do all the assessments until it's time to apply and go through the process. But certainly we'll take the needs of the family into consideration as we go over the tiers and point out which one might be a good fit. Some of the things that we do, the different activities, Steve and I have been talking about throughout the podcast, things like a mock audition where we set the student up with a faculty member to have an audition-like experience. Because when they go to a school for a real audition, they're going to be lucky to get maybe 10 minutes in the room with the faculty. And so we want them to be prepared for that. During the audition, a faculty member may ask them to stop playing in the middle of a piece and then move on to the next one. That's not uncommon. And so we want them to have that audition-like experience so that when they walk in the room, they feel confident and ready. But we'll also, during that mock audition, we'll have time for the faculty member to provide them with feedback, how to better prepare, how to improve whatever pieces they played, and that type of thing. We do portfolio assessments, again, for songwriters or composers, technology students. We're going to set them up with a faculty member or maybe even an industry professional to evaluate their production portfolio, for example, and get feedback on. That's an hour session with a faculty member or industry professional where they'll get really valuable feedback about preparing. We also have programs, the different tiers that include things like help with their artistic resume, how to prepare for an interview, how to choose the right summer program, since we were just talking about those. So the different tiers include a lot of different services. It varies by tier, and then we'll outline all those during our consultation.
When a student comes to us early in their high school career, it's really satisfying that we can spend so much time preparing them and getting them to know what they need. Once again, let's remember that the classical musician and the jazz musician and the pop contemporary musician have different expectations and different requirements. Some of these are obvious to the classical musician, but they may not be as obvious to the pop musician. Give you some examples. Essential skills that every student should have, regardless of the genre of music. They should know how to read music notation. But the jazz performer or the pop musician may not have as much experience or even the reason to have to read music notation. But when you get to college, you need to read music or before. Knowing your instrument thoroughly or your voice is very important. We have many students that have not a thorough understanding of the capabilities of their voice or their instrument or the manner in which they can compose. So knowing thoroughly your expectations on your instrument, very important. Another skill is oral skills, the ability to listen to music and know what you're hearing. Very complex, very complicated, but something that you'll need for your entire musical life. Knowledge of repertoire on your particular instrument, or if you're a composer, the composers are within the field of study that you're interested in. You've got to know the Bible of the trade. If you're a jazz musician, you need to know who played your instrument. If you're a songwriter, you need to know about songwriters. If you're a composer, you need to know about the composers. So knowing the repertoire of your instrument or composers, very important. Improvisation, for some of them, also important. Certainly for the jazz musician, it's an absolute necessity. But for a pop musician, it's also a very valuable trait. Classical musicians usually don't improvise, but if they can, it's something that's very creative. So those are the essential skills that we try to make sure all of our students know. If you're not working on these 6 areas, you need to be doing that every day. And the last essential skill, you just made reference to it a second ago. Some musicians think they don't need good grades in school, that the grades are just not important. And that's not true. And the fact of the matter is, let's face it, this is a very complex world nowadays, Jillian. So keeping up academically just makes for a much better performer, musician, human being.
So, as we near the end of today's episode, I'd love to leave our listeners with something very reassuring. So, for families who are just starting to dip their toes into the whole music admissions process, what's your best advice for them to feel a bit more grounded as they move forward with the process?
Families don't realize just how much attention must go into every step, from picking a major, researching schools, making sure you're on the right timeline. And so every little detail could influence the outcome. And to be honest, it can be overwhelming. And we want people to understand and have a positive feeling as we go away from this, that there's help out there. It is manageable. And that's certainly something that we can help them with.
You need to start with this early. As we said earlier in this podcast, thinking about some of these things we discussed today as you begin your senior year is a big mistake. I think another misconception or something that students can falter over is self-study. Self-study is good, but formal lessons add to that. So a self-study student probably has some things that they've missed along the way by not having formal music studies. I think something that's a little hard to perhaps families to understand. Most parents just support their student. They think they're great. They love what they write. They love what they sing. They love how they play. However, this is a very competitive field. And often students come to us that are a big fish in a small pond. And in their high school, they're the best. And maybe even in their town, they're outstanding. However, that won't cut it all the time, because there are thousands of young kids around the country that are a big fish in a small pond. And now you're all finding yourself in a big ocean together. Not mistaking your level of competitiveness just because you're wonderful in your high school environment is sometimes a mistake.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I've learned so much, and I hope you did as well. Again, a huge thanks to our guests, Steve and Karen from Inside Music Schools, for really pulling back the curtain on what it really takes to pursue music in college. If you're curious about how Inside Music Schools can support your music journey, head on over to insidemusicschools.com to check out their one-on-one programs tailored for aspiring music majors. And if you're looking for personalized support on your college admissions path, our team at InGenius Prep is here for you. Just click the link in our episode description to book a free strategy call and explore upcoming webinars and resources. If you have a question or want to pitch an idea for a future episode, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email at jilian.yong at ingeniusprep.com. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode.